Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
It was a very old, small house with a low roof. It looked worn out from the weather and was a bit far from the road. You might think it was empty, but you could see a thin line of smoke rising from its chimney. But someone lived there. If you opened the creaky door, you'd see an old woman with lots of wrinkles and gray hair. She sat near the quiet fireplace, stirring the weak fire, or sometimes looking out the window without really seeing anything. People called her Aunt Ruth Jones. They didn't know much about her except that she was a strange old lady living alone in that old house. She got the house and a small farm next to it when her parents died about 30 years ago. At first, people were curious about the new person living there. They found a tall, thin woman who was around 34 years old. She didn't talk much, was shy, and seemed distant. Some thought she was proud, while others said she had faced a lot of disappointments in life. But no one could get her to share her story, so eventually people stopped bothering her and she and her old house were left alone. Over the years, things changed in the house. The walls got dirty from smoke, the windows looked dull, and the floor sank in a bit. The room wasn't cozy, and Aunt Ruth didn't seem happy. Some people become small-minded and unhappy when they're alone, and she was like that. Being away from other people made her heart and mind narrow and hard. No one was there to share her happiness or sadness, and no one really cared. Every day, Aunt Ruth did the same things. Chores around the house, sewing, or making things out of straw. Sometimes, she walked to the village store to buy what she needed. Seeing the happy girls in the village with their nice clothes and lively homes made Aunt Ruth feel even lonelier. She was always relieved to get back to her quiet home, where the cats were happy to see her. The old cow, Brindle, recognized her footsteps and eagerly waited for corn or leftover food. The hens hardly moved when she approached. They were used to her and happily pecked at their food. Taking care of these animals was like having company for Aunt Ruth. On cold mornings, she watched them eating while she still hadn't eaten her own breakfast, and her fingers and toes felt frozen. Even though no one lived with her, sometimes a bright presence visited her in the dim house, a child's voice full of questions and sweet laughter. It was Bessie Lane. One rainy June day, when she was on her way to school, she ran to Aunt Ruth's house for shelter. Since then, the cheerful little girl with blonde hair and clear eyes often visited Aunt Ruth to chat. When Aunt Ruth heard Bessie's lively steps and the door latch lifted, her tired eyes brightened and she smiled. The child easily became friends with the lonely woman. Kids are like that, you know. They can be a bit strange sometimes, as wise adults often say. Why do you visit that old lady who lives alone? Eliza Ray, her friend from school, asked one morning. Our maid, Bridget, thinks she might be a witch because she looks so strange. Whether she's a witch or not, I like her, Bessie Lane replied, throwing her hat up and running after a fox squirrel down the road. So Bessie kept visiting, and they would sit and talk for hours. Aunt Ruth showed Bessie old things she kept, reminders of the past, and told her their stories, making Bessie's eyes widen with wonder. On this cold winter morning when we meet her, Aunt Ruth had been waiting longer than usual for Bessie to come. The sky was gray, and the wind blew down the chimney, rattling the windows. Suddenly, Aunt Ruth noticed a bright hood and blue cloak coming closer. She saw Bessie, but she didn't notice the carefully wrapped package Bessie was carrying because she hurried to make the fire brighter and tidy up the room. "Good morning, Aunt Ruth. It's been a while since I've been here, hasn't it?" "Yes, a long time for a lonely old lady like me. But I know this isn't a place for young, happy people." "Oh, yes it is, dear Aunt Ruthie. You mustn't say that. I like coming here a lot. But Uncle Jake has been very sick. He sent for my parents, and I went with them. It was such a long journey. I thought we'd never get there. And oh, Aunt Ruth, I haven't told you yet," and Bessie's face became serious. "What's wrong, dear?" Aunt Ruth asked, picking up bits of clutter from the floor. She always seemed to tidy up when Bessie was around, her hands moving without her thinking. The room was fine for her, but for the child, it looked gloomy and needed some brightness. However, Aunt Ruth didn't realize that Bessie was helping her see the good things in life, or that she was starting to appreciate light and beauty again. "Well, I'll tell you. We're moving away. It's too bad to leave all my friends just when I started to like them, especially you, Aunt Ruth." "I don't want to go at all," Bessie said, tears running down her face. "You're leaving? You're going away?" Aunt Ruth asked seriously. "Yes, and Mom said we couldn't take Chip. It would be too much trouble. So I gave him to Allie Smith," Bessie explained, crying again. "I gave my kitten to Amy Wells, but I haven't found a new home for my little Rose." "Look," Bessie said, going to the table and unwrapping her package. "Isn't it beautiful? You'll keep it to remember me, right, Aunt Ruth?" The tiny flowers were in full bloom, seeming to give a blessing to the old woman. "Yes, yes, dear, I'll keep your rose safe," Aunt Ruth promised. The little plant seemed to distract her thoughts, and she began talking to herself absent-mindedly. Then, remembering what she was thinking, she said, "So you're leaving, and you'll forget about poor Aunt Ruth with so many new friends." "Well, that's natural." "No, I won't forget you," Bessie said, giving Aunt Ruth a big hug. "And I'll come to visit you sometime." They talked for a while longer, but eventually, Bessie said goodbye to Aunt Ruth and her special Rose, and she left like a cheerful ray of sunshine. After Bessie left, the shadows seemed to return to the old house. But when Aunt Ruth looked at the little flower, she made a space for it in the warmest corner, thinking to herself, "I used to carry roses like this to the old church in Amston when I was no older than Bessie. It feels like yesterday, but it's been a long time. Maybe if I did things like that again, it wouldn't feel so dark and lonely. I'll put the rose here by the south window, so if the child ever comes, she'll see it from the gate." Bringing a small pine stand, she carefully placed the plant on it. As she did, she noticed the window looked unusually dirty. "Oh my, it's never been this dirty before," Aunt Ruth exclaimed. She felt a burst of energy and cleaned the glass until it sparkled. But then she realized the old curtain looked even dingier next to the clean window. She took it down and replaced it with a finer one from her drawer. The next morning, as she sat alone eating her breakfast, Aunt Ruth turned her chair to face the window and her rose. The sun was shining, and its rays lit up the room, revealing cobwebs on the opposite wall. She decided to sweep away the cobwebs that day, wash the other window, and clean the floor. The old house hadn't been so tidy and cheerful in many years. Later in the week, she went to the village, wearing a darker dress instead of her usual one with a yellow flower pattern. Somehow, she didn't feel as bothered by the bright dresses and curious looks as she usually did. She even exchanged friendly greetings with a neighbor she hadn't spoken to in a year. A strange feeling came over her, a feeling that she was part of the larger human family after all. The icy wall of loneliness around her heart started to melt just a little. After finishing her shopping, she decided to take a different route home. This path went by a church. Although it was still early, the church was lit up, and a few people had gathered for prayer before the regular service. They were singing now, and Aunt Ruth stopped in her tracks as she heard a clear, triumphant voice singing out. Plunged in a gulf of dark despair. Mesmerized, Aunt Ruth listened to the song until it ended, not moving until a group of people passed by. Slowly walking on, she found herself talking to herself again. "Oh, Ruth Jones, where are you? I used to sing that song too, in the same old church where I brought the roses, but it was years later. I used to pray too. I wonder if God would still listen to me now." That night, and for many nights after, she couldn't sleep. The words of the song kept echoing in her mind, bringing back old memories and feelings until her innermost self was stirred. In her darkness, she reached out, weakly, for the old ways, and the good spirit gently guided her back to the light. I can't tell you every step of her journey, but I know that gradually, surely, the darkness faded, and the peace of mind shone upon her soul. She went to the church where the song had stopped her that night and listened to the words of life. Her life became a blessing. She became kinder, wiser, and more caring. The sick and needy were happy to see her, and children ran to greet her. And did Bessie Lane ever come back? Yes, when June came again, the little figure once more stopped at the gate. But the blue-eyed girl looked around in confusion. This isn't the right place. Aunt Ruth must have moved away. And she had good reason to think so. The house was freshly painted, the yard fence was fixed, and all sorts of flowers were blooming along the path. Just then, Bessie saw a well-dressed old lady tying up some vines. "Can you tell me where Aunt Ruth Jones has gone?" "She used to." Bessie stopped suddenly and then ran into the woman's arms, realizing it was Aunt Ruth herself. It's so beautiful here. How did it all happen? The excited child exclaimed. Aunt Ruth smiled warmly and, taking Bessie's hand, led her into the neat, cheerful room and up to the south window, where the carefully cared-for rose was blooming with beauty and fragrance. Bessie was overjoyed to see the rose, but Aunt Ruth gently sat her down and explained how it all happened, how the little flower had first stirred memories of the past in her heart, how the sacred song had kept her awake, and, finally, how God's gentle spirit had guided her back to a path of peace and happiness.